Every game you've ever loved was a broken, unplayable disaster at some point in its development, and I'm going to suggest the only reason you love it is that you never saw that version. What you ended up playing was the intended experience, or more realistically, as close as they could get to it. The vision was only a dream at one point and came together through iteration and failure. Tons of failures. Sometimes it's wholesale development and leadership changes too. And sometimes it never came together until right before the game shipped. And then you played it and fell in love. That's not Star Citizen. Star Citizen's curse is that it's always in view. Videos like this prove it, and if you're obsessed with it like a lot of us are, you play it all the time too. Every single flaw, every single game-breaking bug, every missing or half-broken system is just staring you in the face. And that can be a pretty big system shock sometimes. I've been playing the remake, forgive the pun. CIG chose this path, but if you're more cynical about it, this was the only one they ever really had available to them. No publisher was ever going to fund this game. Publishers guarantee a studio gets funding and a little time to be absolutely terrible in private, trying to figure it out by trading the biggest bargain piece that they have, control over the product. And when the patience runs out from the publisher, it's all over. We usually don't hear about all the games in development until they're canceled, and even then, we often don't get the full picture of what was being worked on or why it failed. Even worse is when a game that you really wanted gets canceled. I will never forgive LucasArts and Disney for canceling Star Wars 1313. It was exactly the type of game Star Wars needed, a gritty look at the world, and if it was a major success, maybe, just maybe, that rubs off on the sequels.
Nice strategy, by the way. You managed to wreck both ships at once.
Quit your bitching and get in here.
Who knows? But if you have to go the Kickstarter route, you're getting new problems. Kickstarter gives you complete control of the project with the baggage that you need to continue to sell the vision every single day, even when there's little progress to sell. I'll talk more about the monetary logistics in Sunday's Off the Cuff video, so I won't repeat that, but it's usually worth it for a studio to accept Kickstarter if it's an option. That's because most of the time, no one's trying to invent a new genre or pull off the impossible through Kickstarter. Hollow Knight might be one of the most successful Kickstarter games ever made, and Larian, the studio behind Baldur's Gate, wouldn't exist as we know it without it either. Hollow Knight's a well-done Metroidvania-style game, and Larian's been working on RPGs since the original Divinity Sin Kickstarter. It's high risk, but it can work. Steam had such a problem with their early access system at first, they now have very stringent standards for games before they can ask for money from the public. It's rare that it works out well, which caused them to do that. But I'm going to guess that most of us aren't game developers, even if we have a bunch of people that might claim it in the comments. My dad works at Nintendo too, after all. Making a game isn't as straightforward as it seems. All of my admittedly limited knowledge comes from interviews and documentaries I've watched about games I've loved, and one company that stands out to me most is the old pre-EA acquired BioWare. You know, the studio that made a few of the best games ever released, including Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, Mass Effect, and the original Dragon Age. There was a phrase inside that studio, BioWare magic, they called it. The belief that no matter how rough production got, that the game would come together in the final months. Based on their history, they were right every time. I've watched interviews with Casey Hudson, the former director of KOTOR, and he said flat out that a few months prior to release, the game was in such a messy state, no one would have pre-ordered it if they saw it. Mass Effect, also led by Casey, was reportedly the same. BioWare magic was an internal rallying cry for the studio. But later, Mark Dara, who was the producer for those games, admitted that the magic was a sham. The game obviously didn't make itself. BioWare relied heavily on crunch, a term that has a negative association in game development because it means people paying for the magic with their time. We're talking about months of mandatory overtime, nights, weekends, developers sleeping at the studio while their families forget what they look like. The industry treats all of that as normal, just the cost of shipping, and it still happens today. As gamers, we don't see any of that. That's what's considered normal in game development, getting dark years where nothing works, none of the systems talk to each other, and the game is honestly terrible. It's amazing that games ever release at all. There has to be faith from someone that this is going to work. The only reason it does is because they go out of their way to make sure you never see that phase. You see a teaser, a vertical slice at a summer games fest, and that's half smoke and then much later a finished product. Star Citizen used to be on the same damn game show treadmill because they needed to attract the audience. When I first backed the game in 2016, Star Citizen was doing all the trade shows like Gamescom in Germany to show off what they had. It meant that all the demos for Gamescom and CitizenCon would take real development time, and it wasn't necessarily work that would fold into the main game. Like for nearly a decade, sandworms. If you know, you know. The real criticism was that CIG was spending 5 or more months out of the year building demos rather than working on the game. I don't know if that's accurate, but that was the perception. Whatever the development cost, CIG eventually stopped going to those game shows. They didn't need to admit anything. The change in development priorities says it all. While I'm not making excuses for Star Citizen, we have all of the receipts of the broken promises and the accusation of leadership failures. I just look at all of it, I think to myself, there's no straight line from where you are to where you want to be. If my own business ever became a multi-million-dollar entity, I'd probably not be the right person to lead it, but I'd be damned if I let anyone else do it. And that's something I really believe that Roberts learned the hard way. My read from outside the studio is that CIG's leadership team has been completely overhauled in the last 2 years. Gone are Todd Pappy, Tony Zarovich, Brian Chambers, even Orton Freyermuth, one of the original founders of CIG, resigned a seat on their board of directors. We saw the passing of the torch to one guy that's not even on Cloud Imperium Games' About page, Rich Tyre, senior game director. The big interview at CitizenCon last year wasn't with Chris, it was with Rich. The symbolism of that is off the charts, and his fingerprints are all over the changes to the development since late 2024. It just shows that the game is growing up in public, and so is the studio. I bet that Chris Roberts in his wildest dreams never believed the game would have this much of a following. The original pitch for Star Citizen was really a simplified version of today's Elite Dangerous, where you could walk around in your ship and land at limited landing zones. All the transitions were loading screens, and very few things about the verse would be big and detailed. I have no doubt they could have landed that vision easily. And if they had, I don't think anyone would have really cared about Star Citizen 5 or 10 years later. That's why Star Citizen gets 10 to 1 the views of Elite Dangerous on Twitch, despite Elite being a finished, polished, and, mostly enjoyable game. We want the moon shot, we want it all, and this proves it. If people didn't care, none of this would have happened. Having a playable demo was the catalyst for the game to grow out of control. I've seen new players be in absolute awe of this game for the first few months and then turn into the same sarcastic backers the rest of us are. Once you normalize all the things that Star Citizen does that's unique in gaming, it's a hell of a lot easier to criticize it. The longer you've been here, the less impressed you are. That's why last year's CitizenCon got a mixed reaction too. We're so used to getting the huge reveal every year about something that we could look forward to, some big giant feature that's coming soon. But instead, we got short-term things that by 4/11 will all be in the game. And we were mad about it. I have to laugh at the absurdity of it. So I've been thinking about how I want to word this, and I think maybe this analogy is why we get heated when the game doesn't work. Every backer is a stakeholder checking in on their investment, every patch is a shareholder report, every build ships to live servers with a version number on it, and 100 YouTubers just like me waiting to tear it apart for views. Star Citizen is not allowed to be broken. Ever. Especially not when it was working the best it ever had and gave people the impression that we were closer than ever to being done. Listen, part of me wishes I didn't know how the sausage was made. It's impossible to put the genie back in the bottle to pull out a Christina Aguileraism. There was a time years ago when I hated hearing terms like game loops and tier 0 and all the industry slang. It made me look at what I consider fun from a clinical perspective, and that kind of ruins it all. Without that clinical view, it's impossible to understand what's going on. A T0 system is a barely functional placeholder delivered as a triumph. They exist in Star Citizen for one reason. The alpha has to be an experience people can play and hopefully enjoy today, or at least see the direction of while the real system is still being built years away. That's the tax Star Citizen pays every day, and it adds to development time. Everything has to work. Sort of. That's Star Citizen's curse, and the thing that we fight over most in this community comes from it. Polish versus features. There's no game that exists on this level that fights that battle in public. If you could, well, you'd close development, get your systems into a stage where they work with all the features, and then just debug it. That's the BioWare way, the reliance on crunch. It works when the path you're going down is the one everyone knows and has been done before. Star Citizen's development is leading us into a deep dark forest, and I don't know what's on the other side. You're on the journey with me. What do you think we'll find there? I'll see you in the verse.